Resend it to me. That's cool. I get it. I was hoping I could play this for you. But your program, I just want you to know, was on the news. What they are finding that I learned through this conference that I went to is that people don't know who and what psych techs are, the general population. And so that is, and I want you to know, with nurses, people just thought that nurses, up until about 15, 20 years ago, just helped the doctor. They didn't realize that there's a whole science behind it, that it is legitimate, you know, that it is a, what do I want to say, a scholarly endeavor. People didn't know that. And then to boot, some countries in the world view nurses as very low level. And so there was that to combat. So I have to tell you that it is really, the onus is on us to, like I proudly say, when people ask me, I don't say nursing, I say, oh no, I teach psych tech. And they'll always go, well, what's psych tech? Oh, psychiatric technicians, this is my definition. I say it's a very specialized field, but it's a part of nursing. And it has the equivalency of a LVN, but it is in the mental health. So it's very specific, it's very narrow, and they do a lot of help. That's how I say it. And so I just want you, I wanted you to hear what he had to say, but they just on my email had that. And then something else I wanted to bring up, you know, it was interesting this morning. Maria, Michelle, and I had a quick hallway conversation. And, you know, it's like we all struggle when we go through school. Going through school is self-imposed poverty, okay? I myself lived out of my car for 3 months. I had my bread and my peanut butter and a knife in the back seat. Stay at the library as late as I could. Go out to my car, and and to this day, it's really wild. To this day, I find areas, oh, that would be a good place to say, no one would recognize the car there. Or, you know, I'll still do that. But I would look for little places, you know, by laundromats or, you know, different places so I could do things and kind of go to my car. But that's part of the reason what got me into the sorority house. But anyways, so, you know, it was honestly, and I'm not saying this, you know, woe is me, I'm not saying that at all, because, you know what, I dig the variety of my life, you know. But anyways, where I'm going with this is, like, money was a lot harder back in the 80s. You know, scholarships weren't as plentiful, and this free money to go to school and to buy books and books on loan, books at the library, you know, that, you know, no paying for school, that was, you know, like out of the question, or help with rent. But I think it's cool that it's here because, you know what, you guys are doing something that you've probably noticed a lot of your peers aren't doing, you know, this intensity of a program. But anyway, so CalFresh is there to help. So if you need help, you know, by all means, you know, go for it. You know, we all need good food to make our brains work good. So I told the lady that I would show that in class. Okay, so what do I want to do now? I want to come back over here. Oh, I'm going to go over here, excuse me. Okay, what we are doing is we are going to start our lecture on developmental disabilities. I really dig this lecture for a number of reasons. But one, like literally 75% of the abnormalities that happen to people, science doesn't know why. And that blows my mind. And I want to tell you that it wasn't I never finished my doctorate degree, okay, but I got a third of the way into it. And it blew my mind in that curriculum that I went to Loma Linda. That how oh, that's not gonna be a good way to get to it. Well, luckily I have another one. Oh, okay, good. What I learned at Loma Linda through that experience was, though, that how, I always thought that there was so much knowledge out there. I guess because I've always been a student like you, right? And you just think, well, there's always more to learn. There's always more to learn. It just must be infinite out there. But the reality is it's really weird when you are on the cutting edge and there's no more knowledge. You've done an exhaustive lit research and you have a question in your mind and there's nothing out there to answer the question. That happens a lot more than you would think, okay? So let's get into developmental disabilities. We're going to go over the history, classification, and the treatment. Okay, so how do I get this to... Is this the one that I hit to only have that on there? Nope, that's not the one. Does this look okay to you guys? Or can anyone help me? Okay, I'll take that as a no. Definitions, okay? So, when you talk about developmental disabilities, you look at intellect, you look at adaptive, and you look at behavioral, okay? And we're gonna hit those three in two different schemes pretty hard in just a moment here. Okay. In fact, that AAMR, I think should be AAMD. We're gonna get to that in just a minute. But anyways, in 1973, okay, no, it is D. It's the American Association on Mental Deficiencies. So that AAMR, make that R a D up there, okay? There's three components to this. The condition has to be manifested before 18 years of age. Why? Because of this? This is a chemism, this is not science. My thoughts is that because, how many kids do you know that start drugs at 13, 10? Right? They're trying to catch not the drug-induced mental deficiencies or physical things that happen because of drugs, but the pure deficiency. And so that's why the condition has to exist before 18 years of age. It must continue indefinitely. Sometimes with drugs, when you stop, when the person goes into abstinence from the drug, well then their twitch will stop or their mental fog will lift. It represents a significant limitation for the individual. We're going to talk about what that significant limitation is. Okay, now this is interesting to me too, that this population that we're talking about is only 0.3 to 3%. I shouldn't say only. 0.3 seems fine to me, but when you start getting into 3%, that's a large part of the population. Of general population are estimated to have, and I want to say mental deficiency or cognitively impaired. Cognitively impaired is kind of a chemism, but the literature says mental disabilities, okay, is what they do not state anymore mental retardation, okay? It's considered to have a stigma attached to it, and they don't want to see that stigma perpetuate. Okay, so the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, this is a big deal. CMS is a very big deal. We answer to JACO, right? JACO is the third party governmental organization that oversees us in the clinical setting. CMS oversees the doctors, okay? require facilities to replace the term mental retardation with the term intellectual disability. So there that is. Okay, I like that. Don't diss my ability. I agree with that. Okay, so the categorical approach resulted in an emphasis on the person's condition or label, which stigmatized the individual. So that's not good, right? We don't want to stigmatize anybody, because once you put someone in a box, you've already dissed them. You've already put them to the periphery. You've already pushed them aside, okay? That's, anyone in a scholarly circle is fully aware of that, and you are too, okay? So that is why it is very important that you be scholarly and thoughtful about your words, okay? Because when you are marginalized, that's another word that we're talking about that describes this. When a person is marginalized, how do they get back into the mainstream? By their First Amendment rights, the ability for free speech. And if someone bullies us or says that what we have to say is not right, or they're gonna label us, stigmatize us as anti-whatever, then what they're trying to do is shut us down. And that is happening very frequently right now. And unfortunately, it is also happening in colleges and universities. This is supposed to be an area where we get to tease out our thoughts, your thoughts. And no one is right or wrong. Okay, this weekend, I got into an intellectual conversation with one of my peers at the conference. And they were going at it very comfortably and friendly, and I was going at it very comfortably and friendly. And it was fun. I felt like it was fun to kind of bat the ball back and forth, so to speak, with someone who has been in your field a lot longer than I have, and to kind of tease out our thoughts. And then, I don't know if I was right or wrong, but it was placed on my heart, so I went ahead and emailed him and just said, hey, I really enjoyed that conversation. It was really good to have an intellectual conversation, and I want you to know you caused me to think. And they did. And I really dig when people do that to me. Thank you very much. Hope I didn't offend you. That wasn't my intent. I was just trying to keep the ball going back and forth. And, you know, I'm sure they weren't offended, but anyways, I just felt like I had to do that. Okay, so it's unacceptable to say a Downs baby, a slow learner, retarded. You know, we treat them just like we treat the rest of us. You know, we call them by their name. And in our setting, we have to get permission from our clients to call them by their name. Okay, we just, until we have their permission, we call them by Mrs., Miss, or Mr. Okay, once you label me, you negate me. That is very true. Okay, so we're gonna tear this down, okay, in the next 6 slides or so. But let's kind of take it in its totality. Mental retardation refers to substantial limits in present functioning. Okay, so we all know that this is where a person maybe has an IQ, see you later, thank you, has a maybe 3, 7, 12, whatever it may be. It is characterized by significantly sub-average intellectual functioning. Okay? Existing concurrently. So it's not just enough for them to have mental impairments. They also have to have concurrently related limitations in 2 or more of the following adaptive skills. Okay, so what are those adaptive skills? Communication, self-care. You know, isn't that what we try to do in our chaining, our sequencing, and all of that? Home living. They can't be independently home alone without causing a risk to themselves. social skills, community use. Okay, now listen, I gotta tell you, I get offended when I see community use, because going on a public bus terrifies me. I don't know how to read those signs. I don't, and to think that they have to is like pretty amazing for me. Self-direction, we are all independent, autonomous beings. We have self-direction. Health and safety, functional academics, what does that mean? Can we write checks? If you don't write checks, can you pay online? Can you master how much is coming in financially and how much is going out? So that would be an example of functional mathematics. And another example would be, do you know what 2/3 is? Do you know what a half is? So that when you're cooking, that you can cook for yourself. Leisure and work, very important. Why? I gotta tell you, I got to bed at 1 o'clock on Wednesday night. I haven't gotten to bed that late since my sorority days, okay? We were just like, you should have seen us. And then those guys were such a gas to go with. And, I just cut loose and we were just like running all over Morro Bay at all hours of the night, and it was fun. And I'm calling Wayne, and he says, oh, you got to take them to Schooners. They're going to love Schooners. And off we ran, and it was that leisure kind of mixed with work, but very minimally work, after hours anyways, was so relaxing to me. And just so, can you tell I'm a different person? I'm just kind of like, oh, whatever. Okay. Mental retardation must manifest, and there it is again, before 18.
What is
Sub-average, okay, everyone in this room, our IQ is probably 110. In order for you to be here, I feel pretty confident in saying that, okay, is 110. Sub-average is like 60, 70. A person with IQ 70 would not be in this class more than likely unless they had grit. Okay, grit. You can have emotional intelligence, you can have academic intelligence, you can have social intelligence, you can have physical intelligence, and then you can have grit. Okay, now honestly, grit is probably the most important one, because grit is like when you pull it from an internal focus, an internal loci, and pull it out, that's grit. But typically people who have an IQ of 60, Benny, you would be able to tell probably 6 sentences, maybe 10 into the conversation. When you started to talk about higher functioning things, they wouldn't get it. They would totally get talking about other people and maybe talking about happenings. The coming election. But then you would say, well, what do you think about Proposition 26? 27. You're thinking, well, that's what I say. Well, you're in school, so you're not paying attention, possibly. But you should be by November 8th, right? Okay, they're not going to get it, unless someone really sat down with them and really slowly and kindly went over the pros and the cons. They might get mixed up in the inertia of it, okay? And then you would notice, okay, I'm dealing with someone, bless their hearts, that is probably below 60. You start getting into 30, it's a very low IQ, okay? Then Mensa, on the other hand, Mensa is someone who has an IQ of 160. Now, you know what, that's all fine and good, and that sounds maybe like a place to be. But if they don't have the other intelligence, what good is that? You've got to be a well-rounded person in order to get along and move along in society and in your personal life. I answered that, didn't I, Benny?
Yeah, so that's like far below average.
Yeah, far below average. I would say 40 to 60. You're going to really notice it. These are the people that get confused on, they'll ask you, well, what's today? And you'll state the date, and they'll say, now, what number of month is that? Because they don't know the sequential of January through December. or, they'll give little clues. Now, I don't wanna say that someone that doesn't know that is mentally deficient, that's not true. But, that's typically things that we learn, in elementary school and can learn. Okay, mental retardation, here it is, significantly sub-average intellectual functioning means that the person significantly falls below average intelligence. The person has difficulty to learn, solve problems. Forget abstract reasoning with these folks. It is not there. They are 100% concrete. They have difficulty accumulating knowledge and adapting to new, they like the same. When they're in a new situation, that really freaks them out. However, sub-average intellectual functioning can change. They can change, they can learn, it just takes them a little bit longer. Okay, mental retardation. Limitations in the adaptive skills or behavior means that the person with mental retardation fail to meet the standards of personal independence and social responsibility expected of their chronological age and cultural group. Okay, what do we expect? We expect that at 18 you graduate from high school. We expect that by 25 and now this was not me, I was a slow learner in this area, okay? I didn't really pull it together until I was about 30, maybe 28, if I want to lie a little. By 25, what do we expect? That you can, drive a car, get around town, that you are well into your career, whatever that may be. Okay, those are examples of adaptive skills, that you can live on your own, that you can maintain your own checkbook, your own finances, eat healthy, maintain your own nutritional status, maintain your own health status, maintain your own social status, whatever that might be, okay? And then, mental retardation, related limitations in the adaptive skills area means that the person has difficulty in performing the following tasks: to communicate, self-care, home living, community use, social skills, self-direction, health and safety, functional academics, leisure and work. Okay? So what we're trying to do here, well, let's go through this. Okay, here it says below 70 or 75, and I told you 40 to 60. Honestly, someone at 75 can talk to you and you're not going to really notice it unless you get into the abstract thinking. Okay, so what is abstract? Math is a lot abstract, isn't it? So you would have to, you would notice they would have difficulty in saying, well, you know what, I told you 15, but get 2 less. They're going to have a hard time with that. Note it is important that the person must meet all 3 of the above criteria. Thus, they might have to have an IQ below 70 or 75 is not sufficient to classify a person as mental retardation. So they have to have, like it says right here, that they have to meet all 3 of the above criteria. Okay, so there's 5 components here. Attributable to a mental or physical impairment or a combination of both. A lot of times, not all of the times, but a lot of times, if a person has a mental deficiency, they will also have a physical impairment. But the reverse is not true necessarily. Just because someone has a physical impairment does not necessarily mean that they're mentally impaired. Okay, so did you get that? Mental impairment, more than likely, they will have a physical attribute. But just because they have a physical attribute does not mean necessarily that they will be mentally impaired. A good example of this would be someone with cerebral palsy. Obviously, I'm thinking of my dad. Really bright, the guy could do calculus in his head, I swear to you. When I was taking statistics classes, he was doing stats in his head, and we were talking about the answers, which it would take me about 10 minutes on paper to do. Okay? But to see him, he was very much physically impaired. So that's an example of someone being very physical impaired, but not being mentally impaired. A lot of times these physically impaired people will, because it was so hard for my dad to write, but yet he loved numbers, well, he found a way in his head to make it work so he didn't have to write. A lot of times these people will have a hobby or an area that they, linguistics is one, where some of these people are just, really, they can edit papers like crazy, they understand the English language, but yet they have a hard time speaking it because of maybe one of their physical attributes. Manifested now here, we've kind of jumped all over the board, right? Now we're saying 22. The whole idea here, in my way of thinking anyways, and if you guys see another one, please enlighten me, and I sincerely mean that. What they're trying to do, and this is a Kimism, is that there's funding available for this group. They want to make sure it gets to this group. They don't want to start siphoning it out to people who fall into this group because of drug addiction. They want those drug addiction people, who is it over there? They want those drug addiction people to get their own funding, okay? They want to keep this pure. They want to help who they want to help. Likely to continue indefinitely. It includes infants from birth to age 5 whose conditions may result in developmental disabilities if services are not received. Okay, you guys know this, right? If you catch cancer, the most obvious thing, right away, like right away. Okay, now it's on my mind right now because what, Wayne took that aspirin and he missed his colonoscopy and I haven't rescheduled it, and he has a history, they're kind of watching something in his abdomen, okay? And I'm like, all of a sudden, I'm like, okay, lights on you, lights on you. But if you have cancer, doesn't it make sense that if you catch it early, you can usually take it out, excise it, and it's no big deal. Yeah, you have to recover from surgery, but at least it hasn't metastasized, okay? That's kind of an obvious one. Here, we're talking about something that's not quite so obvious. If you have a child that is not meeting those milestones that we learned about in our last week's lecture, then you need to be like, all hands on deck, all hands on deck. This kid is not rolling over. Why? There's something neurological there that's impeding them. What is it? We need to check on it. All hands on deck, all hands on deck. That person is not walking when they should be. At 2 years old, they don't have 1,000 words. Boy, if the milestones are there to alert us that something is going on. And how do you tell in a young child? It's difficult, isn't it? Unless you have those milestones, those benchmarks that you can really compare against. Like I said, my dad looked like a normal baby, my grandma told me, at birth. Okay? It wasn't until he was about 18 months, 2 years old that he couldn't walk that the problem started. I know that seems weird to me, and I believe my grandmother because she was, oddly enough, an instructor. That's another, she was actually a superintendent of schools somewhere in the Midwest, I think Nebraska. But anyways, I think she should have been more astute, but anyways, that's another story. So that's what we mean by this bullet under number 4. And then number 5, because we said up here that there are 5 components to this functional approach, okay, is that it results in a substantial limitation in 3 or more of these activities. Okay, so the other one was all of them, and now we're saying 3 or more. I got to tell you, it kind of threw me a little bit. I was like, okay, what am I keeping track of? Why was I like that? in order for us to have recall, and you have to have recall on this information, because you're going to be talking to a client's parents or to another physician, another psych tech, and you have to have things pigeonholed in your brain so that you can have recall. Yeah, Leslie?
I don't understand what you mean by functional approach, because isn't approach a way like of doing something?
Okay, good.
A way of dealing with something?
Yeah.
I don't get what that means.
Okay, let me go back and see if I can answer that. What we're doing here now is in academia, a lot of times we tease things out. And in us teasing them out, we come to look at things from different approaches. So when we started this lecture, we had this definition right here, and then we teased it out. We pulled out, we extrapolated little avenues that we're going to discuss and talk about and have in our profession as the mainstay. And so that's what we did here, okay? We said that it has to be characterized by a sub-average intelligence, has to have related limit, okay, and this, here it's saying 2 or more, okay, of these areas. So then here we are, teasing it out. We're kind of, if you will, almost giving a definition to every phrase or word that has a valuable gem attached to it. Then we got here, and now we have 5 component. This is up here, was more a definitive or by way of definition way that we're going to classify these developmental disabilities. Now, we're going to classify them as in reference to their function, of how well the person can function in each one of these areas. And so they called it the functional approach, okay, to defining these folks that we're going to have as our clients, their disabilities. So one, they have to have mental or physical impairment, or a combination, has to be before 22, be indefinite, and that if we give them help before 5 years of age, that we can have minimize their disability. And then, now we're gonna say that these folks, it results in what results? Their disability results in a substantial function of 3 or more of these life activities. So they have possibly, now I'm gonna say if all of these, A through G, are the 2 of the 5, okay? But self-care, they can't deliver self-care to themselves. We can't trust them to do that, okay? We can't trust them around water for bathing. We can't trust that they will eat sufficiently enough, take in enough calories for their existence. That they have either receiving language, they don't understand it when it comes in, or they can't express it, okay? That they have language difficulties, that they can't learn, that they have difficulty with walking, maybe driving, but typically walking. They have no self-direction. You guys got up, you knew exactly what needed to be done. You knew there was a test, you knew what was gonna go on. These folks don't have that. Why? Your frontal brain is your executive part of your brain. That's why when someone has a traumatic brain syndrome, or that we wanna know which part of the area of the brain. And if it's a frontal part, they're gonna have difficulty, not that they can't do it, but they're gonna have difficulty. See, now, we need 9:45, we started, and it's 10:21. We had a test this morning, and I wanna be sensitive to that. Do you guys need to have another break? Yeah, okay. Let's take a break. It's 9:21, let's come back it's 10:21. Let's come back at 10:30, okay? Leslie, was I beginning to answer that though for you? Okay.
So if functional approach is like going back to
inside
I'm
tech
getting better
thing.
now,
I
it's
would
just
go
that
into your book and go into the contents,
He's too
the
much
back part of it,
I think
and look under this. Or I would look under, if it didn't have that, I would look under self-care. I would look at language, I would look at learning ability. With this functional approach, it would probably be better if we said functional classification. Okay? Okay, I don't mean to be rude, but I want to talk right now to get us out of here. Okay? So on here, I want this, and thank you, Leslie, I mean that very sincerely. This should be functional classification would probably be a better word to use, because what we're doing right now is we're saying, you know, we can look at it this way, we can look at it this way, and we have yet another one that we could look at it this way. Okay? So wherever you work, they're gonna kind of fall into one of these three. Yeah, Benny, were you gonna say something, sir?
Yeah, so would it, on the test, would it say approach or classification?
It wouldn't say either. It wouldn't say either. We're just learning this. This is kind of minutia, if you will, to get us in, to understand that there's more than one way that people are gonna look at this. Okay? They might look at it purely by a definition, and then they might look at it as how the person presents functionally. And then the next way we're gonna look at it is how does the person present in terms of how much help we need to give them. Okay, it's just different ways of looking at the same thing. Okay? Okay, so with this functional classification, we want to see that if not only are they having this mental impairment, and these other four are going on, but if they have limitations in 3 or more of these major categories, and health sciences does this a lot in the service fields, okay? It will look at the person and say, can they give self-care? Oh, no, they can't. Oh, okay, I need a home health aide in there. Receptive and expressive language, can they do that? No, they can't. You know what? I need a speech pathologist in there. Learning ability. Okay, now I need to put them into smaller classrooms. I need to tailor the classroom to what they need to learn. Mobility. If they can't walk or they have to be in wheelchairs or whatever, now I have to design something for them to be able to maneuver the wheelchair through that. I have to be able to maneuver the shower so they can get their wheelchair in. Self-direction, okay, you know, now they don't have, where we left off before break, is your executive frontal lobe is what allows all of us in this room, and I know whether you've had a traumatic brain injury or not, I know that you can do this. Because you couldn't be in this room if you couldn't. But we all know how to say, you know what? I need to go to work from this time to this time. And then if I'm gonna study, I better study from this time to this time, because I'm not gonna have time tomorrow because I have class and clinical and blah, blah, blah. Okay, even if you have to write it out, you can still follow it. But that self-direction is incredibly important. We all do it and we don't even think about it because we're so used to doing it. These folks don't have that ability. Okay, capacity for independent living. You know, you gotta be able to do certain things if you wanna live independently, right? You gotta be able to know to fill your tank up, to, you know, how much money you need in checking, how much you can spend before you go over, what do you need to eat, what elements need to be in that diet. Economic self-sufficiency. It cracks me up on, you know, when I work with young women, and I'm talking young high school, they'll say, oh, I'm gonna do this and that, and I'm like, wow, that's really a great plan. How do you plan on paying for it? Well, I haven't figured that out yet, they'll tell me. And, you know, I'm like, okay, let's reverse that thinking. How are you gonna pay? What's your income gonna be? You know, what's going on this end, so we can take everything, because it all applies to this. So economic sufficiency okay, mental retardation may be a developmental disability. Okay, we already said this. But a developmental disability may not be mental retardation. Okay, make sure you understand that play on words. Okay,
Can you use this example to be able to distinguish? like,
yeah,
certain
this is a good one, cerebral palsy. Like I was talking about my dad earlier, could do everything in his head. There was no mental problem there. But you know what? To look at him, he was a total train wreck. Total train wreck. Okay? But, so he was a good example of, but typically when people have mental retardation going on, mental impairments, they will typically have, it was really weird. Do you know that your kidneys are formed at the same time as your ears, and your ears are formed same time as your temporal lobe? So typically if you see a person and their ears are lower, that means that they're gonna have kidney problems. Is that wild? So there's all these little nuances that go on embryonically, right? And it's wild when you think, I'm just gonna spend a second on this. But what happens is we all were, this little group of cells, right? Made up by the sperm and the ovum. They came together, and now they are going to form your spinal cord. And so they have to overlap, and then this one has to come out and go over, then the mesoderm has to slip on top, but then the ectoderm has to come over on top. And I just made that part up, okay? The layering was right. But all of this fine stuff has to happen. And if it doesn't happen exactly the way it's supposed to happen, you're gonna have a spinal cord deficiency. You're gonna have spina bifida. Okay, then it starts to make the heart now. And then all of these the heart starts beating pretty young. And the spinal cord is fully intact. And I'm talking weeks, okay, not, 9th month. Okay, and so all of these things have to take place, this folding, this looping, this kind of halfway going over for things just to be perfect. Okay, so, and when you look at it that way, it's easier to understand why a person could be physically impaired but not mentally impaired, but why a mentally impaired person is usually going to have a physical problem too. Okay. So, we've already talked about this slide. That's why those benchmarks, those landmarks are a big deal. That is why, in my opinion, Andre should be like, oh my gosh, this is such cool information to learn. I'm gonna write these on flashcards because I wanna make sure that my kid rolls over. I wanna make sure that my kid is sitting up. I wanna make sure that my kid is crawling. This is why it's good to have grandma. I'm not touting for grandma since I'm one, but that's why it's kind of good to have an older person around, because they kind of remember what you did or what should, and if it's not happening, that little nudge comes. Okay, if they're slower to master feeding or dressing themselves, I'll never forget, it's one of my fondest memories. No, Nana, I do it myself. And she'd come out and it would be inside out, but by golly, her arms were through it. You know what I'm saying? That was very important. Difficulty connecting things. We talked about blocks, how they'll get 3 at about 6-9 months and they'll hit it over. They won't even think about putting the 4th block on. They're just so into that 3 and knocking it over. Behavioral problems. Well, we all, even at our ages have temper tantrums. But do we go on and on and on and on about them? Yeah, no, we drop it. Difficulty problem solving or logical reasoning. I mean, that's obviously very high thinking. We're starting to get into abstract there, or it is abstract. Okay. Classification of mental retardation. However, now that should be the AAMD, not R, has introduced a new system. Okay, if 2 wasn't enough, now we're going to add another one. That is based on the amount of support. Why? Because they're being more pragmatic. They're being more practical, right? What do we have to do to make this person function the best that they can? Now that's what this approach, or should I say Leslie classification, is gonna be all about. Okay, so now we have 4 here. The first one, do they need intermittent support? As a kind of PRN, if you will, as needed basis. Only at certain periods of time, but not all the time. They have difficulty getting from work to school and vice versa. So that's when we are going to help them there. That would be intermittent support. Limited are required consistently, though not on a daily basis. The support needed is of non-intensive nature. Okay, limited support. Maybe they need your support every other week when they go grocery shopping. Maybe they need it once a month to pay bills. Okay, that would be like limited support. Extensive are needed on a regular basis. Daily supports are required in some environments, for example, daily home living tasks. So this is where you're gonna send someone out to their home 2, maybe 3 times a day. You know, they can live alone, they can master things, they have the gray matter that is sufficient, but they need a little prodding throughout the day to keep them on task and to make sure maybe that they're eating, that they're getting to where they need to go. Okay, then we have, you know, pervasive. These are, you know, heavy duty. We're gonna have to be there all the time. You know, here we talk about life support type thing. Perhaps a life-sustaining nature required in multiple environments. Okay, now this is the slide, I gotta tell you, that ever since I started teaching this class has just like really hit me hard. Look at this second one. Okay, there's more than 250 clinical or biological cases exist. That's a lot. Okay, so that's a lot of little nuances that can happen. 250 different, I don't want to say disease process, but of what would be, I'm so used to saying disease processes because of my background, but this is 250 areas that someone could be deficient in, okay? Only 25% of clients fall into these classifications. Look at here, 75% have unknown etiology. Etiology means cause, right? So, you know what that tells me? That it's by the grace of God that all of us are in this classroom right now. That it's not because she drank too much or the guy, you know, beat her or whatever. 75%, they don't know. That could have been you, that could have been me. They don't know. Okay, that is most of the time there is no clear physical or biological cause. Okay. Now we're going to have a different, get ready, classification here. Etiological factors are based on time of onset, okay, prenatal or biological, perinatal. Perinatal means during birth. Okay, a lot can go wrong during birth. That's why when I was an OB nurse, honestly, I said, this is me, I get to be me. But before every birth, I said a little prayer. Because so much can go, not so much can go wrong. Yes, things can go wrong, but they have such a long-lasting consequence for that person. And then postnatal is afterwards and environmental. Okay, so we have prenatal, perinatal, and postnatal.
One of my friends, she's a medical director, OBGYN at Melinda, and she was just telling us yesterday how many mothers really do pass away during birth, but at Loma Linda, I guess since she revamped it, so that's like one of their main concepts, that there haven't had a death in like a birthing death in a while. And then she's thinking about starting like a, what's it called, a podcast about that. And it's like for women and stuff, so I thought it was pretty cool.
That is
She was
very
like, no, you don't realize how many women really die during childbirth.
Okay, now, having been a Loma Linda graduate, having worked there to pay for my education, Loma Linda, what's really cool, in my opinion, about Loma Linda, that they go by the letter of the law on everything they do. On all of their reporting, It's by the letter of the law. So their rates are sometimes higher than the average, but that's because they don't let anything slide, and this is a good example of it.
Yeah. Did you work there recently?
No, during school, when I was working on my master's. I did summer work for them. I really enjoyed research at that time in my life. But anyway, so here we're gonna look at some causes of, and I don't wanna say, I'm gonna say cognitively impaired, yeah.
Ms. Kim, have you ever heard the term that death goes around your bed 7 times when you deliver a baby?
Death? No, I haven't, but pray tell, pray tell. What do you mean by that?
Devlin was just, have you ever heard of it? We were just discussing it, and it's always kind of like scary, because it's just an old omen, like death goes around your bed 7 times
When you're delivering
when
a
you're
child?
delivering a child. And I always thought about it, like, what does that mean? Is 7 ways or 7 reasons you can die, or what? But, I mean, death is a big deal when you're delivering, so.
Yeah, okay, as long as we're talking about this, okay, we have young women in the class. What happens when you are delivering a massive amount of blood? You have 40% more blood volume when you're pregnant. And then the main blood supply that is supplying the uterus for the child, actually it's going through the, what's the top part? Help me out here, you guys. No.
I'm like, I'm trying to think.
Thank you, I do appreciate it. But the child lives off and sustains itself to the mother by what? The placenta. The placenta. There is a major blood vessel that goes to the placenta, and then there's all these little, like if you will, tributaries, they all have their names anatomically, that go then to the baby. Well, if that blood vessel, she's the closest to death when she's delivering a child, a mother is. When that large blood vessels that's feeding all these chorions, doesn't get closed off, and that's why they massage the uterus, is they're massaging it, because the uterus has to, like if this is the uterus and the baby's come out, then this is the side view of the uterus has to close and start to clamp down. And why is it clamping down? To put pressure on that blood vessel so that the mother doesn't bleed out. And if that doesn't happen, then yeah, you'll have problems. She'll bleed out, literally. And then now you've got to rush into surgery, and now she's got to have a hysterectomy, because you've got to stop that bleeding. So it's pretty intense. If something's gonna go wrong in birth, it's usually a big deal.
What about what is it, a hemorrhage?
Yes.
Those are big deals.
Yes, and that, I have some of my scariest moments in nursing have been in a gurney, holding on to a mother's internal up and clamping down and putting pressure on that. And I'm in the gurney, in between the mother's legs doing that. Well, we're going to surgery to get things going. Even right now, you can't see it, but even my skull is having goosebumps. It's intense, and you need to know your stuff. When you work for a unit, you need to ask yourself, what is the absolute worst that could happen? And then you need to do adult learning and prepare yourself for that. Okay, but anyways, back to this. Genetic and chromosomal causes. Okay, so that is a cause for mental retardation. We're going to call it cognitively impaired or mentally deficient. Okay, prenatal. So that means before the mom became pregnant even, and during her pregnancy. Prenatal causes are those that originate during conception or pregnancy until before birth. Okay, so it's prenatal is before she's pregnant up until the time she delivers. Then perinatal is that time that she's delivering. And then postnatal is after the baby is born, out about 6 weeks. Okay? Until birth are chromosomal disorders. So now we're going to kind of start going into this, okay? There's Down syndrome, where there's an extra chromosome on number 21. There's Klinefelter's, there's Fragile X syndrome, there's Turner syndrome, there's Prader-Willi-Williams syndrome, and then there's metabolic disorders, okay? We're going to learn about these, PKU, hypothyroidism, and Leschner, okay? So we're gonna go into these, just let's look at a couple pictures here. You know, the most obvious one that we all hear about is Down syndrome. And this is where there's an extra chromosome. Sometime you'll hear this referred to as trisomy, because it's an extra. Should only be 2, there's an extra one, so now there's 3. So there's 3 chromosomes on number 21. Here is Klinefelter's, okay? This is, it can happen to women, but it's more predominantly with male, and it's where they have an extra X. I shouldn't say extra. That's where they have an additional X chromosome, okay? So they're a little bit more feminine looking. Not that they're not men, not that this is a reason why they may be a homosexual. It has nothing to do with that. Okay, they have the same testosterone drive, but they're gonna look a little bit more feminine because they have an extra X. Okay, then we have Fragile X here. You know, just look, it's just not bifurcated at the top there. The knotting is a little different. Wills syndrome, desperately low IQ, but they have a real sensitivity to sound, makes them good at music and language. There are a lot in the literature how Williams syndrome is like a lot of English majors, a lot of department heads of English departments of well-known universities. Prader-Willi is right here. We're gonna get into it, okay? Okay, now this is the last area. Excuse me here, I just wanna keep track of time. Okay, it is 10:53. I want to do about 8 more slides, okay? Can you hang with me? Okay. Okay, so we have cranial malformations during embryo Genesis. So Genesis is like the first book of the Bible is Genesis. It means in the beginning, Genesis. Okay, so embryo is the child after the sperm and ovum have united, okay? So during embryogenesis, we can have brain disorders, right? Did I not say that the spinal cord and the brain, I didn't say and brain, but the spinal cord and brain are the first thing that those 3 layers start to curve over on. Okay, we can have anencephaly, okay, so ana means without, cephaly means brain. The major portions of the brain are absent. This is a major neural tube defect. Spinal bifida is a less severe one. That is, it occurs in the brain or in the spinal cord, is what a neural tube defect means, okay? Microcephaly just means that they have a small head, okay? The skull is small and conical. That means cone-shaped, conical. The spine is curved and typically leads to stoop positions and severe mental retardation. There's a low life expectancy for microcephaly, and anencephaly typically lives for weeks, right? You have to have a brain in order to live, and depending on how it is in the pons area. Okay, so here we have anencephaly. The major portions of the brain are absent. This is a major neural tube defect. Okay, here it is. Infants does not survive typically beyond a week. Okay.
Can you tell if that will happen in the ultrasound?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, you can see this in the ultrasound, and you can also they can pick up on parts of this if they do an amniotic centesis. Pick up on it. Okay. Other head deep. Yeah.
How many weeks into the pregnancy do we tell an ultrasound?
How many weeks?
Oh, months.
I'm sorry. I'm having.
Like, how old was the uterus?
Oh, the embryo need to be,
Yeah.
okay. And the fetus, typically to pick up this stuff, it's like 2 months. 8 weeks. It's not very long. What happens is that because the spinal cord is developed outside of the skin, well then in the amniotic fluid there's too many of those cells present, and so then they know something's going on. Then they can do an ultrasound and pick up, although we usually do least invasive things first, so they'll do an ultrasound, see that there's a problem, then do an amniocentesis, and that will finalize it, usually give the diagnosis for it. A lot of these things are picked up really quick, okay? I know there's a lot, with Roe versus Wade, which only changed things, took things out of the federal government's hand and put it into the state's hand. That's all that did. End of subject. Now the states decide what we're going to do. So we'll probably see next cycle election more things on the ballot having to do with this. Okay. Typically, a child can live outside the mother's womb at about 18 to 20, definitely by 26 weeks gestation. Okay? You want a child to stay in the mother's womb, though, for 40 weeks so that we get the full benefit of mom, right? But I have held in my hand an 1.5 ounce child. And that child, I don't know how they're doing now, but they made it out of the hospital fine. Okay? It is amazing what can live outside of the uterus, okay? But, we're going to decide that as and you guys are going to be a large part of that dialogue because of the field that you've gone into. You know so much more than a layperson that's not in it. So they're going to defer and want to talk to you about it. And a lot of times, those are the conversations that have me, going on to Google, and taking my knowledge and applying it with what I'm reading. Okay, then we can have microcephaly. Okay, the skull is small and conical. The spine is curved and may lead to a stooped posture. Now, isn't it interesting that posture and IQ are tied, right? Because they're made embryonically at the same time. That's why. And severe mental retardation, life expectancy is low. Okay, we went over that one. Okay. Then we can have water on the brain. Hydro, right? H2O, hydro. Cephaly is brain, hydro is water. So now we have a blockage of cerebral spinal fluid in the cranial cavity, causing the head to enlarge and increase pressure on the brain. So when you have increased pressure on the brain, it's pushing the gray matter. And that's pressure now on the gray matter, which is not good. Why? Because it's going to limit its ability. It's like an inflammation going on. Leads to mental retardation, stunted growth, deformed limbs, visual problems, low life expectancy. I graduated in South Dakota. I graduated from Sisseton High School on an open Indian reservation, and there was a girl there that had hydrocephaly, and she had a shunt placed at birth, and her IQ was less than, and we all knew it, but we all loved and took care of her, and she was in all of our classes. She was totally mainstream because they didn't have at that time a specialized area for her to go to. And in math, she would just color or do different things, and then we would go to the next class, and we all would say, oh, Julie, come on, we're leaving, and she would come with us. But her head, I remember at graduation, she had to have a hat enlarged for her to sit on her head, and she had hydrocephaly. Obviously here is, a real example. It's showing in the ventricles are the center part of the brain, okay? And that's where CFF, cerebral spinal fluid, is made, is in those ventricles. And if too much is made, and why is that made? That's when we jar our head. It allows the fluid to kind of take the impact. So it doesn't hit our brain up against our skull or our spinal cord up against the vertebrae. Okay, so it kind of cushions any jolting that takes place. Well, obviously, if you have too much, it's going to push up against the brain and enlarge the skull. Okay. Now we're leaving that, and we're going to go into environmental causes of mental retardation, okay? Guess what? The mom has to eat a good diet. And if she doesn't, well, she's building that child. It's gonna show on the kid. Now, this kid is gonna strip mom of everything, including the calcium out of her teeth. It's not uncommon for low socioeconomic moms to have teeth fall out after delivery, okay? Because that child's gonna strip that mom of anything it could get. Radiation during pregnancy. The best example I can give, after we bombed Japan during World War II, Hiroshima, the next generation had multiple kids come with leukemia. Why? Because radiation changes the DNA structure forever. Okay? So that is why moms have to be really super careful around radiation. That is why our rad techs wear lead aprons. Okay, that's why they have gagameters, or where they measure the radiation exposure that they have. Once they hit a limit, they can't go for any more exposure because of radiation potentially changing their DNA structure. Juvenile, look at that, juvenile diabetics. Okay, so that type 1, out of all of the people who are diabetics, 5% are juvenile diabetics, type 1 diabetics. It's very hard for them to have pregnancy. Not that they can't, but it's very difficult. Okay, then we have alcohol fetal syndrome babies, okay? These children, you can really tell they'll outgrow it, but they'll have an extra flap at the inner canthus of their eye. And they'll outgrow it, but you can tell when you look at baby pictures and the different stages that they were an alcohol fetal syndrome baby by that. Okay, so now remember that 75% of the etiologies for these folks, we don't know. Science does not know anything. Okay, so we're just talking about that 25% that we know something about. Okay, substance abuse during pregnancy, excessive alcohol causes fetal alcohol syndrome, ADD, and ADHD. Okay, does it mean if someone has ADD that this was the cause of it? Possibly, but not necessarily. Cocaine causes low birth weight. Okay, now why is that bad? Low birth weight, a child who has an inhospitable uterus doesn't have the brain development that it should, okay? And that is obviously not good for IQ. So cocaine causes low birth weight and can cause the other two, as you can see there. Okay, now, I want you to know that this is an old slide. There is a lot that is coming out on marijuana as far as smoking while the mom is pregnant, as far as learning disability. And I want to, you don't have the benefit of time because you're not 63 too. But I remember that when Newsweek was a newsworthy magazine, and it came out with this big article on babies who had been exposed to cocaine were now entering, kind of as a group of them, a cohort if you will, into 1st and 2nd grade. And the teachers were like, oh my gosh, we've never experienced this before. There was so much disruption that they had never seen in the class, so much inability of a 5, 6, 7-year-old, lack of concentration, lack of ability to pay attention. And Newsweek wrote this big article on it. And what did those babies have in common? They had cocaine exposure in utero in common, okay? So I don't know how it will, weather out with marijuana. I just know that whenever you have anything that lowers your inhibitions, you have things that are messing around with your DNA. No one's gonna tell you this because I don't know why, just, it's unpopular to talk about, maybe, I'm suspecting, at least 50% of this room smokes pot. And so as I'm saying this, that doesn't go over well. But we don't really know how marijuana is going to weather itself out, okay, and what studies are gonna be done. And we've already learned in this class, when you look at a study and it's done by a pharmaceutical company representing the drug that it wants to sell, what do? What any intelligent person would do? You would say, I want to see other studies. I don't want someone who has their best interest doing the study. I want to have an independent person doing the, or group. And then, what you really want is you want it to be aggregated, okay? You want multiple studies around the world being put into different stats and seeing how they come out. And usually Cochrane database, not EBSCO, but Cochrane is the best one for that. They will take, yeah,
I just don't understand how they don't have, I mean,
I know,
it's been,
I know. Why?
marijuana's been around forever.
Yeah, it has been, since the 20s identifiably, but before that in history, absolutely. Because it's not popular. Because the people who have maybe a part of it have a nefarious or a reason why they want to stifle. Like, we've really seen science get stifled in COVID, have we not? Look at all of these great brains, a lot of initials behind their names, have really stifled true, honest research on COVID. And then, unfortunately, because it became a political ball, now we don't have that. It will probably take 25, 30 years for this political to kind of decrease so that the true knowledge can get out. And so things happen politically, things happen socially, things happen like when there's wars going on in the world. Different people have different ulterior motives, and therefore science gets used. Science is meant to be, and what drew us all to science is the truth, right? It wasn't about who did it, why they did it, what color they were, how much money they made, what other extracurricular activities they did, if they were a star, a celebrity. No, all of that is not supposed to matter. What's supposed to matter is evidence-based practice. What is evidence-based practice? That's where science has teased out anything that's impure and given us what's pure. Pure science. That's what but that's not our environment right now. So that's what I think. I think that, and honestly, I hesitate to say this, but, it's kind of like, okay, so we have alcohol, we have pot. Honestly, I'd rather have pot. It's easier to, it's not as damaging, it's easier to confine, and it's not easier to treat. It's as difficult as alcohol to treat if you're going for abstinence. But now we've got two going. And, the bummer about that, and this is not me speaking, this is science, is child neglect. Whenever anyone's on anything that's a mind-altering substance, who really gets hurt? It's the children. And I could go on. How do you get a relationship really on target if someone in the relationship is mind-altered? It doesn't happen. So, the benefit, then again, that's another reason how the kids. But I hate showing this slide because I don't want you to think, oh, marijuana is fine, because it may not be. Yeah, Chase?
So you think there is something that they just haven't found yet?
I do. I personally do. And the reason why I do is because of all of my friends that smoke pot casually. They do not see cause and effect. they hit themselves against the brick wall, they hit themselves against the brick wall, and they're in this constant state. And they keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. And I see the common denominator in all of that is pot smoking. That personally, at my age. Now, I grew up in the 70s, okay? By all rights, I should be loaded every week on pot because that's how all my contemporaries pretty much are. You know, the 60s, free love, free drugs, you know, free everything, and then the 70s kind of took it, yeah.
I mean, since it was like in the 60s and 70s, but it might not just be weed, though, it might be other stuff that's
Yeah.
causing them to do that.
Oh,
too.
yeah, that's true, and I agree with that. But then they gave up that stuff and continued with pot.
Yeah.
That's why I think it was
But
pot.
once you hit
Yeah.
that other stuff, that is,
Yeah.
long lasting.
And that is, to be taken as, you know, consideration, I do agree. But anyways, this is where I'm gonna stop. You can go ahead and read over this, you know, small for gestational age is a big deal. And then sudden death syndrome, increased infant mortality. We'll pick up from here on Wednesday.
That's what I'm saying, I'm more happy.
Wait, hold on, guys. We have like a quick announcement to make. We just wanted to. Yeah, we'll make this quick. We'll make this quick.
2 minutes,
Yeah.
okay, sorry.
So I just wanted to know what everybody was gonna do for the health fair. Like what?
Do you guys know if you're doing it, like clinical section wise?
We don't know what we're doing, girl.
No.
You guys don't know if you're
We
gonna
said we're
participate?
doing
We all have to participate, don't we?
I
Yeah.
don't even know where my
Oh, we
group
do?
is at.
Yeah, it's not a
Yeah.
choice, you have to, it's just a
They
topic.
said we're doing a stress, stress.
And what
stress
section are you
relief
guys?
Board.
Well, that's Ellie's group. Ellie's group, at 14.
When is this, the 27th, right?
Yes.
Thursday.
Thursday.
This Thursday?
Yeah.
From what time to what time?
9 to
To
1.
1, something like that.
Okay.
So what, we just show up at 9 or what?
Yeah.
It depends on your instructor, that's why we're confused, because no one
Girl,
has
we
said
don't know
anything.
either, because none of them have said nothing.
It is.
Why don't we wait, why don't we talk about it Wednesday, because tomorrow we all meet with our instructors. Like they talk about it Wednesday, so, because we haven't spoken to our
Right,
instructor.
well, can you
True.
guys, one of you guys from each section, find out with your instructor if
Yeah.
you guys are gonna go?
I think section 2 is gonna be with Ellie's group.
Sarah told us that we were with Ellie's group, that's why,
Y'all don't know who.
yeah, so can you guys find out and then let us know Wednesday?
On Wednesday, talk to your instructor. That's bad. I mean Tuesday.
Okay, because Sarah told us we were with Ellie's, that's why.
Do you think she's here?
Sarah will say that.
Sarah told us,
We'll find out.
Do you know if Michelle's here? She is?
Yeah, just talk to your instructors on
He's
Tuesday.
was conducting a test up above.
It don't matter about just showing up, I'm not.
Do you think she is in her office right now or not? She had to turn in like a flash drive to her with a PowerPoint. That's kind of an idea. Okay.
What's wrong with me?
Hey, if it's coming to Michelle's here. Yeah. Honestly, she could be That's what
Tell her I gave it to some lady. The white blonde lady, and she said that she was gonna make sure you got it.
Ellie told us we were lower on you. That's how we get the stress. I'm actually stress thing. Stress and yoga or some shit.
but yeah, just find out and let us know. I don't wanna